Throughout the history of the Final Fantasy franchise, countless protagonists have been introduced that would have been able to gain significant recognition. The popularity and associated marketing of each game would have of course helped to propel some of these protagonists into the spotlight, but the struggles they faced along their respective journeys were also very important when it came to establishing a connection with the player base. There were numerous devices used to help present these struggles, but one of the most effective was the use of a foil. These characters would stand toe-to-toe with the protagonist and were used to highlight certain qualities. But what's interesting is that while the foil was sometimes situated as the game's ultimate big bad, it wasn't given that these two roles would intertwine. Instead, it was just as likely that the role of the foil would be transferred to someone lower down the totem pole. When this happened, it helped to create a much different dynamic, and one of the best examples was Seifer Almasy. When development began on Final Fantasy VIII, the creative minds at Square felt they wanted to try and mix things up when it came to the game's narrative. In previous iterations, the story had often been focused around a ragtag group of heroes who came together due to circumstance more than anything else. But with Final Fantasy VIII, they felt it would be interesting to have all the characters be the same age, and the best way to do this was through placing them in a military academy. By going down this route, it enabled them to spend time building out the relationships between most of the main cast based on their shared history, and even though there was a convenient plot device put in place to try and dissolve their memories, this shared history helped certain emotions amongst the group persist as they were more deep-rooted. One of the relationships that benefited from this approach was the one that existed between Squall Leonhart and Seifer Almasy. Even though through the story you didn't really see the relationship develop, just from their first interaction you could tell there was some serious history there, and as the story played out, this helped you to go through a range of emotions in relation to how you felt about Seifer as a character. You could say he chose the wrong side, but the developers were smart in how they executed Seifer's story arc, and that's because things are not always as simple as they may seem. It's why we are very excited to run through the story of Seifer with you all today, as outside of him simply being Squall's rival, he is an incredibly rich and detailed character in his own right. Before we do though, just a quick reminder to let us know in the comments who you'd like us to see cover in a future Origins video. Alright, so let's get started with Seifer's origins. Seifer Almasy was born on the 22nd of December, 18 years prior to the main events of Final Fantasy VIII, but like so many other children born around the same time, he would never get the chance to grow up in what many would perceive to be a normal family environment. And that was because before Seifer even turned 1, Galbadia invaded Timber, annexing it as one of their territories and plunging the world into chaos. This act initiated what would later become known as the Sorceress War, as Esther responded to Galbadia's posturing with military advances of their own, and throughout this period the war took a terrible toll on the population. Many adults were slain in combat, either fighting for greed or to defend their homes, while others were caught in the crossfires, serving as collateral damage or succumbing to illness or exhaustion. This was the unfortunate fate suffered by the parents of Seifer, and in the long run, this ended up leaving him emotionally scarred. To try and respond to the epidemic of parentless children, Edea Kramer and her husband Sid decided to set up an orphanage in an old Centran ruin. They tried to take as many children as they could, and Seifer was one of the first, alongside Quistis, Squall, and Alone, with Selphie, Irvine, and Zell joining not too long after. Perhaps due to being slightly older, Seifer felt ostracized and struggled to connect with the other children. This then led to him craving attention, and unique relationships formed based on how his actions were perceived by the other children. 3 in particular took exception to the way he behaved: Squall, Zell, and Quistis. In the case of Squall, he was a physical and mental match, and Seifer took pleasure in attempting to find a chink in his armour so that he could prove his superiority without question. This led to a rivalry developing between the two, but if Seifer came off worse after their sparring, he would often lash out, and his focus was often placed on Zell. Unlike Squall, Zell couldn't control his emotions that well and would often try to rise to whatever challenge Seifer presented. This was the kind of vulnerability Seifer had hoped to see in Squall, and he used this as fuel to torment Zell whenever a suitable opportunity arose. but this also led to another dynamic developing between Seifer and Quistis. After Elone left, she would often step in to try and protect the other children whenever Seifer acted out, but he couldn't understand why she would choose to do this, and it led to Seifer becoming contemptuous of her actions. These fractious dynamics built up in the years that followed, but they were given pause as each member of the orphanage ended up going down a different path upon its closure. Zell was adopted by the Dinkt family in Balam, and Quistis was also adopted, although that particular arrangement did not work out. Selphie and Irvine were enrolled in Trebia and Galbadia Garden respectively, and Seifer and Squall were kept together, enrolled at Balam Garden, where they would develop under the watchful eye of Sid Kramer, who was assigned as the headmaster. Upon enrolling, students had the possibility to learn how to use a variety of weapons. Seifer chose the Gunblade, a very rare and powerful weapon, and he did so having been inspired by seeing the hero of his favourite movie wielding the same weapon. Squall chose a Gunblade as well, and as they were the only two to choose this specialised weapon, their already existing rivalry intensified as constant comparisons were made. It should have been a fair competition, but unbeknownst to the pair of them, Squall was earmarked for special treatment due to an event that had occurred while they were still at the orphanage. It was during this time that Edea was visited by Squall from the future. This visit encouraged her to establish Garden and Seed so that they would be ready for the perils that they were destined to face, and Squall would be the focal point of their efforts so as to prepare him for the role he would surely need to play. The consequence of this action was that despite showing plenty of raw talent and being at least an equal to Squall, Seifer was often overlooked and held back by comparison. This favouritism was then compounded by Seifer's moral compass. With no real values to cling on to outside of just doing what they were told, Seifer tried to define for himself what it would mean to be a Seed, and this would see him follow his own path as opposed to following the path that was expected of him. It often led to Seifer doing what he believed was the right thing to do, but the establishment seldom celebrated his accomplishments. Instead, they admonished Seifer for being disobedient, regardless of whether what he had done had been for the benefit of others. And with his transgressions highlighted for all to see, Seifer ended up becoming resentful of the situation as he felt trapped. Deep down, Seifer was a good kid. He just needed someone to throw him a bone once in a while, to sit him down and tell him that he had done a good job and that they were proud of him, even if he didn't fit the perfect mold. But those scenarios never occurred, and Seifer started acting out. Something that led him to being labelled as a problem child. To make matters worse, Seifer could see that Squall was being showered with praise, and it ate him up inside because he knew that Squall couldn't have cared less about the attention he received. This ended up taking a significant toll on Seifer's mental health. It would lead to him lashing out at those around him, and the outlet for these frustrations was often the Balam Garden Disciplinary Committee. Seifer started this student-run committee alongside Fujin and Raijin, two students who looked up to him due to his rebellious nature. Perhaps out of guilt or the hope that it would help him to become a better student, it saw Seifer placed in charge of enforcing the garden's various rules in an official capacity, but he often abused his power and bullied other students. This in turn led to him becoming even more ostracized from his peers, and he often felt alone, trapped in a cage he didn't feel he could escape from. These feelings were exacerbated by the use of guardian forces, which caused him to forget about his shared history with the other kids from his orphanage. When they came back into his life due to various circumstances, he ended up reverting back to old habits without really knowing why, such as picking on Zell and showing contempt for Quistis even though she was his teacher. To try and numb all of these feelings, Seifer would indulge in fiction as a form of escapism, and he would read plenty of books and watch movies about Sorceress Knights, using them as reference for his own behaviour. Such was the impact of these works of fiction that in addition to choosing to wield a gunblade after seeing Zephyr use it in his favourite movie, Seifer also decided to go against conventional wisdom, adopting Zephyr's fighting stance as well. This was rather unorthodox, but as a testament to Seifer's skill, he still managed to make it practical. And it was due to this skill that Seifer was still given assignments and placed in roles where he had authority, as despite the issues the faculty had with his behaviour, they hoped that he would one day be able to turn the corner and become, well, a bit more like Squall. This saw Seifer put forward for the Seed exam numerous times, but he failed each time as he refused to follow orders and showed a poor attitude. When Seifer was 17, he was able to spend a bit more time away from Garden, and it was during this time that he met a girl called Rinoa Hartley. Rinoa was a resistance fighter who was also trying to find her own way in life, and she instantly connected with Seifer over their shared lust for freedom. Both believed they had been shackled by authority, unable to act in the way they wanted, and such was Seifer's passion that Rinoa was blown away. She became smitten by the idea of him fighting alongside her as they worked to free Timber from Galbadia's oppressive rule, but due to their respective situations, it was difficult to stay in touch and they were forced to separate with minimal contact. Not too long after, Seifer was given another opportunity to try and pass the seed examination, but on the morning of the exam, he took part in a duel with Squall, the latest in their ongoing feud. Often, their duels would end with an amicable resolution, and each one of them would return to Garden with things to work on for the future, but this duel was different. Perhaps realising that his time was running out due to his age, Seifer decided to up the ante. He wanted to prove to Squall, while he still had the chance, that he was a superior fighter, and as the duel waged on, this saw him gain the upper hand. Seifer caught Squall by surprise, sending him to the ground with a burst of fire, and showing no remorse, Seifer struck him across the face to confirm what he believed would be his victory. But after landing the blow, Seifer let his guard down to gloat, and gave Squall the opportunity to return the favour. This meant the duel ended with yet another stalemate, and Seifer was beyond frustrated. Despite this incident though, it was decided that Seifer should still take part in the seed examination as a member of Squad B, alongside Squall and Zell, and it was also decided that he would be the squad's leader. This was no doubt done to test each of their mental fortitudes, as the faculty would have known all about the testy nature of Seifer's relationship with the other two candidates. Even before the mission commenced, it became clear how Seifer felt about the customary proceedings he was part of, as unlike every other candidate, he refused to wear the cadet uniform. He also made it clear that Squall and Zell had only one objective, to follow his lead to the letter, and he was dismissive of Zoo's mission briefing, as he was unhappy that such a talented squad had not been given a more important task. This then led to Seifer falling into the same old trap. In the initial sense, he was a good leader, and under his guidance, Squad B completed their objective with ease, but he became restless with what he perceived to be unnecessary shackles placed upon him. When he observed Galbadian troops heading to the radio tower, Seifer's moral compass told him to disregard his orders. He must have known that this would lead to him failing the exam yet again, but he believed he had good reason to go against his orders, as his squad had stumbled upon an unknown element and it needed to be investigated. It saw Squad B abandon their assigned post, and this was where Seifer's reputation preceded him. Instead of working with his team, Seifer left them behind as he felt they were slowing him down. It saw him single-handedly take on the Galbadian forces situated within the radio tower, and after receiving the order to withdraw, Seifer made his own way back. It meant Seifer's noble intentions had again been sullied by the poor attitude that had plagued him over the years, and after they returned to Balam Garden, he was again admonished for his unsavoury actions in a public manner. Due to his transgressions, Seifer was prohibited from attending the graduation ball, and as a result, he missed the chance to see Rinoa again. But after hearing that she had been in attendance, and that Squall, Zell and Selphie had been assigned to assist with her request, Seifer forcefully escaped from his disciplinary room in order to provide assistance. Blinded by his own ego, Seifer believed that even though the three of them were now seed in the official sense, none of them had the stomach to do what would need to be done in order to free Timber from its subjugation. And he was right. Galbadia outfoxed Seed, thwarting their attempted kidnap of Vinzadeling and using it to their advantage. Realizing what had happened, Seifer took advantage of the situation and again acted on impulse. He stormed the Timber TV station and took President Delling hostage with the cameras still rolling, but he hadn't thought the next part through. Seifer had been focused for so long on doing the right thing and being the knight who rode in to save the day, but he had never thought about the consequences of his actions or the reason why certain orders had been given to him. In the past, when he had been under the protection of Garden, they would have often attempted to clean up his messes, but this was different. There was no coming back. He had taken the president of Galbadia hostage, and there would be far-reaching consequences. Realizing his options were limited, Seifer retreated, and that was when he met Sorceress Edea. For years, Seifer had felt underappreciated at Garden, and he had become convinced that the organisation had limited virtue as they were unable to do the right thing and never took sides in any conflict. Seifer had also been wanting to believe for the longest time that the works of fiction he held so dear were true, that there were real heroes in the world, and they would rise to stand up for the people in times of need. Seifer also had the more selfish dream of becoming the knight of a sorceress, much like his idol Zephyr, and Edea exploited all of these feelings as she manipulated him with ease into joining her side. Such was the grandeur of the role that Seifer became blinded by the reality of his situation. He wanted so much to believe that Edea was a noble person, but he failed to see through her illusions, and within a short period of time, Seifer had become convinced that Garden were the enemy. The first test of his resolve came soon after in Delling City, but everything that happened reaffirmed in his mind that he had made the right choice. Windsor Delling had been vanquished, and the people were celebrating the end of his reign. It was just as Seifer had imagined, and he revelled in his new position as the Knight of the Sorceress who had freed the region from Galbadia's oppression. Desperate to prove his worth, Seifer stood tall and proud next to Edea throughout the parade, and when Garden made their move, he was confident that with the shackles removed, he would be able to prove once and for all that he was the superior fighter, not Squall. As the battle ensued, it was close fought, but this time, Squall was the victor. It meant the moment that Seifer had dreamt about for so long had ended in a humbling defeat. This was a crushing blow. Seifer always believed that he was meant for this role and that his experiences, intuition and passion would see him be able to overcome any challenge that was put before him. But after being defeated by Squall in front of Edea, Seifer was infuriated and embarrassed. Due to this failure, Edea could have chosen to relieve Seifer of his duties, but she still saw use in having him around and exploited Seifer's yearning for attention. She ignored his transgressions and instead gave him the important task of interrogating the captured seed members, and this boosted his ego. When squaring off against Squall once more, it led to Seifer gloating, because even though he had lost the duel, thanks to Edea's faith in him, he had still won and could continue to live out his dream. Such was his desire to repay Edea's faith, Seifer had no problem ramping his interrogation techniques up a notch, and years of pent-up emotions and resentment poured out as he told Squall that he was planning to hunt down every last seed member to remove the threat against Edea. To enact the first part of his plan, missiles were launched at both Balam and Trebia Garden, but after they realised Balam Garden had avoided the strike by becoming mobile, it was decided that Galbadia Garden should be used as a platform for a full-on assault. Seifer, who had now been installed as the head of the Galbadian military, was placed in charge of this operation, but he also had a secondary objective outside of just eradicating their foes, and this was to find alone. This level of responsibility was more than Seifer could have ever hoped for, and after he learnt the truth about everything, such as his past from the orphanage, Ultimecia's role and the wider objectives, he revelled in the role that he had been asked to play, embracing the darkness inside and becoming a monster. When he came face to face with Squall yet again, Seifer laughed in his face due to how superior he felt, and he even chose to goad Rinoa about the relationship they had had. But for all his bluster and improved powers, Seifer was still defeated. This was another crushing blow to Seifer, and Edea this time showed her disappointment. Nonetheless, Seifer mustered all his strength to stand by Edea once again, this time to try and salvage some pride. But in his weakened state, Seifer was no match for his adversaries and was felled yet again, this time declaring how disgusted he was with himself. In their previous conflict, Edea had managed to overpower her aggressors despite Seifer's inept performance, but this time she was defeated, and this freed her from Ultimecia's grasp. But Ultimecia instead chose to control Rinoa, using her as a conduit to revive Seifer and give him new orders. During the commotion, Seifer slipped away, but after he was freed, he began to realise that he had been manipulated. What he thought was reality was nothing more than a lavish fantasy that he had been far too eager to buy into. Seifer had aligned himself with the wrong side, and he felt like a fool as he had traded one cage for another. These demoralising feelings were then compounded by the realisation that nobody would be coming to bail him out this time, and so he became resigned to his fate. He knew there would be no redemption. His actions had been far too severe, and he was in too deep. The only choice available to him now was to continue serving Ultimecia as a lackey and hope he somehow managed to survive in the end. As such, he set to work on finding Alone and unearthing the lunatic Pandora, an Esther weapon that had been plunged to the depth of the ocean that would help them to bring back Edea. With both of these objectives achieved, Seifer's next task was to protect Edea while she recovered, but by this point, he was a broken man. When he squared off against Squall for the third time, Seifer's typical bravado was gone, replaced instead by bullish confidence. He was no longer living the dream, and as his closest friends abandoned him, the only thing he had left was to fight for his pride. This saw him muster up the strength to defeat Odin, but after Seifer was swept away by Gilgamesh, it was just another reality check, and he went back to being a loyal minion, capturing Rinoa and taking her to Edea. With this final task complete, Seifer slunk away in the shadows as he made way for Squall to try and undo the damage he had done. It was fortunate then that they were able to succeed in this endeavour, as Ultimecia was vanquished and everything returned to relative normality. This would have no doubt been of great relief to Seifer. With Ultimecia gone, he was now free, and for the first time, that freedom was real. As time passed, he was able to reflect on what had happened, reconnecting with Fujin and Raijin and coming to terms with the decisions he had made, to the point where he was even able to smile again. And that concludes the story of Seifer Almasy, one of the main antagonists of Final Fantasy VIII. To me, the thing that's great about Seifer is that there's so much depth to his character, and one of the main inspirations for wanting to make this video in the way we did was seeing some of his last words. They showed that Seifer was a somewhat reluctant antagonist who had just made some bad choices along the way and had become trapped, not knowing how to escape or make amends. On the surface, it's easy to paint Seifer as the quintessential bully. He's often picking fights and acting like a jerk for no reason. But if you dig a little deeper, you can see that Seifer just wanted some attention and guidance. It must have been difficult to always be told you're wrong or you've made bad decisions. And the trouble was that Seifer had no problem voicing his concerns and acting out in defiance of what he felt were rules and regulations that were put in place to try and crush his spirit. This made him an easy target for the establishment, and he had to try and find different ways to cope. One of them was to escape, concocting his own fantasies, and the other was more grounded in reality, as he bullied students like Zell that he found were easy targets for his own outbursts. Now, that's not to make excuses for Seifer's actions. He chose his path based on his own delusions of grandeur after becoming too influenced by the world he wanted to see, as opposed to seeing the world for what it was. It's just a shame, because even though very few people saw it, his heart was often in the right place, and if he'd been given the proper guidance, Seifer could have quite easily become the hero he desperately wanted to be. But yeah, with that small analysis out of the way, that marks the end of this Final Fantasy VIII Origins video. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please do hit that like button, share the video around to all the people you know who love Final Fantasy VIII, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our channel. Also, make sure you let us know what Seifer means to you as a character in the comments, and let us know who you'd like us to cover next. Alright guys, this is Daryl signing out. A big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, and of course, a big thanks to all of you for joining me on this deep dive into the lore of Final Fantasy VIII. I hope to see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.